unforgettable music that has become part of the really soundtrack of our lives.
Every time you heard, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," every time you heard that song on radio, how much did the Presley estate make? Zero. Nothing.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Monday evening. I'm Holly Furfer, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news. From oral arguments in a Supreme Court case that could transform the U.S. government to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to London for peace talks amid the ongoing war with Russia. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. New data shows the Trump administration has arrested about 220,000 people for immigration violations in 9 months. Researchers at Berkeley Law School say ICE agents detained nearly 75,000 people with no criminal records since January. The enforcement has ramped up in Democratic-led cities like New Orleans and Minneapolis. The Department of Homeland Security has not responded to requests for comment. New York Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani is encouraging residents to know their rights when dealing with ICE agents. In a video message posted Sunday, Mamdani says ICE cannot enter private spaces without a judicial warrant. He warns that agents are legally allowed to lie and sometimes show false paperwork. Mamdani says people have the right to remain silent and ask if they're free to go. President Trump is criticizing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy over peace talks to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Trump claims Zelenskyy has not read a U.S. peace proposal after 3 days of negotiations wrapped up Saturday.
We've been speaking to Ukrainian leaders, including Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy. And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelenskyy hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it. Russia, I guess, would rather have the whole country when you think of it. But Russia is, I believe, fine with it, but I'm not sure that Zelenskyy is fine with it.
And Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is meeting with European leaders in London right now after peace talks in Miami stalled over the weekend. Let's get more on this now from Scripps News international correspondent Stuart Smith, who's live for us in London. And Stuart, what do we expect to happen from these talks today?
The whole point of these talks is to try and make sure, from the Europeans' point of view, that any deal brokered with the help of the United States between Russia and Ukraine also respects European security concerns. When you don't consider Russia, when you look at the rest of Europe, Germany, the UK, France, they are the countries with the biggest population, the biggest military spending and the biggest economies. And that's why those three leaders are here in London to talk with President Zelenskyy to make sure that their interests are respected, but also they believe they see their role more broadly as one of helping Ukraine get what it wants. Russia and the United States, so much bigger than all of these countries. And so Europeans here in London are hoping to try to support President Zelenskyy get the kind of deal that he believes he can sell to the country. Comments like that from President Trump won't help his cause there. We don't, of course, know if they're accurate, whether he's read them or not. And that was on Sunday. So perhaps by now, if he hadn't, he has now read the latest. But there is this constant tension between what Russia wants, what the US wants, what European countries want, and what Ukraine wants. And that's why we keep seeing the pendulum swinging from side to side. There's no clear evidence, for example, that Russia is happy with the latest deal that is being discussed. We know that there is a deal, but it's not public. The details aren't out there for us to see and make a judgment ourselves. And Moscow has been notoriously cautious about giving any indication it's willing to soften any of its red lines. So we heard from the UK Prime Minister earlier, Keir Starmer, who says that the issue of how this war is resolved is up to Ukraine. We've heard from the French President and the German Chancellor, who are talking about giving the power to Ukraine to ultimately decide what it wants. But you can't ignore that larger backdrop of the fact that the US really wants this finished very quickly, and that Moscow, however, and Ukraine, both at the same time, still believe this is not ultimately something that does have to be resolved right now. There's this common saying going around: Russia and Ukraine are both losing the war, but Ukraine's losing it faster than Russia. So the key question is, will Kyiv feel this is the moment to take big compromises, or can it still push out even longer?
And Stuart, if they can't come to some kind of agreement, is there any plan, do we know, for these European countries, the coalition of the willing, to reach out to the United States to talk with President Trump and his administration so that they could work on something cohesive if the U.S. sort of going at it alone, putting their own peace plan forward, doesn't work?
Yeah, well, the US peace plan effectively relies on European contributions, so it would be essential for the Europeans to play a role. In fact, the United States would rather it's a European-led thing in practice, whether that means troops on the ground in Ukraine or some other security guarantees. The difficulty has been that the United States wants to achieve that potentially with the Europeans not wanting to go along with that plan, either due to cost concerns, due to concerns about ending up in a direct confrontation with Russia, or due to political concerns too. So that dialogue does happen. The difference is that the Europeans and the United States aren't always on the same page either. But President Zelenskyy just earlier emphasized it once again. He says, we can't manage without the Europeans, we can't manage without the Americans. Both sides need to be on the same page when it comes to a potential deal, aside from whether Russia is happy with it or not.
All right, and we will follow, see what happens with these talks today. Scripps News international correspondent Stuart Smith live in London for us. Thank you for that update, Stuart. Now let's take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. People in northern Japan are assessing the damage after a 6.7 magnitude earthquake hit just a short while ago. It caused a small tsunami about 15 inches high. Nuclear plants are conducting safety checks. The country's prime minister has set up an emergency task force. Paramount is making a hostile bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, challenging Netflix's $72 billion takeover deal. Paramount is offering $74.4 billion, or $30 per share in cash. That's $18 billion more than Netflix's offer. Paramount says its bid would create a stronger Hollywood and benefit the creative community. That offer expires January 8th of next year. The Transportation Department is waiving $11 million in fines against Southwest Airlines. The penalty stemmed from the airline's massive flight cancellations during a 2022 winter storm. That grounded 17,000 flights and left more than 2 million travelers stranded. Southwest originally agreed to pay $35 million to the Treasury as part of a $140 million settlement. But now the government says Southwest deserves credit for significantly improving on-time performance and investing in operations. We'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's return to our briefing of today's top stories. Powerball jackpot. You know that little thing? It keeps growing after no one matched all the numbers Saturday night. Now tonight's drawing is about $875 million worth with a cash value of $403 million. You might be able to survive on that. Saturday's drawing did produce one $2 million winner in New Jersey. If you want more information, you can go to Powerball.com. And the college football playoffs are set with the Indiana Hoosiers occupying the top spot in the nation heading into the tournament. And as always, there was controversy over who made it and who didn't. This year, Miami and Alabama got in, while Notre Dame was snubbed despite having the same record as the Hurricanes. Notre Dame has since announced they will forego any bowl invitations and simply just end their season. The first round of the playoffs kick off December 19th. A fast-growing petition is calling for the removal of Lee Zeldin as head of the Environmental Protection Agency. This follows a continued wave of deregulatory actions under his watch, including approval of new pesticides containing forever chemicals and the rollback of chemical safety safeguards. This petition, backed by the Make America Healthy Again movement, argues Zeldin's agenda threatens public health and undermines the EPA's core mission to protect air, water, and communities. Business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett has been tracking this and is with us now from our DC newsroom. And Maura, what specific EPA actions really prompted this whole petition?
Well, it's been the EPA's agenda since the beginning of the Trump administration to really focus on those deregulatory actions. They're very proud of them. I get many press releases every week talking about the different items that they've either been rolling back or editing, and they're largely focusing on rolling back environmental protections, those air and water quality assessments, emissions regulations, as well as industrial pollution controls. And so it's the fact that a lot of those protections are being rolled back that is really frustrating the Make America Healthy Again movement, known as MAHA, right? And this was a huge section of President Trump's base, of the Republican Party, leading up to the 2024 election. Over the last few months, there's been a few moves specifically out of the EPA that has angered the movement, focusing specifically on those forever chemicals that you mentioned, known as PFAS. One of the rollbacks was a key drinking water safeguard that protected against having those forever chemicals in our water, as well as the approval of 2 pesticides that can be used now in our food systems that also rise to the level of the definition of PFAS. And so that's what really spurred this petition. It was launched on Friday, and it's championed by several influencers, big names in the MAHA space that have been behind Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr., President Trump, getting them into the positions they are because of the stance that they've had about rolling back what they call poisons in our environment and in our foods. And so the petition specifically calls for Administrator Lee Zeldin's removal, saying that he's, quote, prioritized the interests of chemical corporations over the well-being of American families and children, and that with the chemicals they say that he's approved, they're saying that these are going to pose serious threats to both present and future generations, saying that it will, quote, inevitably lead to higher rates of chronic disease, greater medical costs, and tremendous strain on our healthcare system. Now, I am in touch with the EPA. They say they're working on a response to me, but they have not gotten one back to me just yet. But again, they have largely celebrated these moves rolling back and kind of have really pushed away this faction of the party. So that's what's interesting to see here, Holly.
And Maura, it's surprising because the MAHA movement really has been incredibly supportive of the Trump administration, specifically HHS Secretary RFK Jr. So do you think this signals a potential fracture?
It definitely could signal something like that, right? And so the whole basis of the MAHA movement, it's based in family values, protections to have, against toxic chemicals, drinking water, safeguarding public health. It's very much something, they're known as the MAHA moms, right? They're trying to protect, they say, the way that their children are growing up in America. And so this was something when RFK Jr. was on the campaign trail and then was placed into the role of HHS Secretary. The MAHA movement was very excited about this because he agrees with them in the sense that pesticides are poison, that they can have severe health risks. And so when you have that juxtaposed against the EPA really going along with the traditional Republican values of industry-first policymaking, the commitment to deregulation, there's clearly like a butting heads action there, and they're less aligned on those fronts now. The MAHA movement specifically cares less about those industry-first policies and more so making sure that those pesticides, those toxic chemicals are not in the food systems. And so, like I said, they've specifically supported RFK Jr. I've also reached out to Health and Human Services to get a sense of, if there's any liaising happening between that agency and the EPA to kind of get this under control, because the movements need to go so hand in hand in terms of the goals that they're trying to seek out. But when you see one part of the administration going one way and one the other, especially when we're on the brink of a midterm election year, that definitely could signal a problem when it comes to how other Republican lawmakers, anybody running for office, period, needs to shape their rhetoric or their talking points on a campaign trail, because there's clearly a divide from just within the administration as a whole. Holly.
Yeah, an interesting split. All right, Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett live for us. Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
You're asking us to destroy the structure of government.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's continue our walkthrough of the day's top headlines.
The Trump administration wants the Supreme Court to overturn a 90-year-old decision limiting when presidents can fire board members of independent federal agencies. Lawyers are defending President Trump's decision to fire Federal Trade Commission member Rebecca Slaughter without cause. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us now live from outside the Supreme Court with details here. Stephanie, the court's 6 conservative justices had already signaled strong support here for the administration's position. That was all before today's argument. So get us up to speed on what happened this morning.
So we've been getting those signals from the court through a lot of the shadow docket, the emergency docket decisions. We've been hearing from the court on a number of other firings that have been contested under Trump's second administration. So the 90-year-old precedent, 90-year-old Supreme Court decision has allowed Congress to basically put removal protections in for some independent agencies like the FTC, like the National Labor Relations Board, saying that a president can only remove someone for cause, trying to ensure that when Congress created these agencies that they would remain independent, making sure that they wouldn't be subject to quick partisan whims of a president coming in and then firing everybody on one of these agencies or commissions and then making it much more partisan based versus the independent agency that Congress wanted to create. The big question that the justices were wrestling with today is the separation of powers. Can Congress limit the president's executive power in that way, arguing that a lot of what these independent agencies do and these independent commissions does fall underneath some of the executive branch authority, which is why the government was arguing today before the court that the president should be allowed to fire them. Now, there certainly seemed to be a line and a distinction between the conservatively appointed justices on the court, but the 3 liberal justices were all pretty clear and pretty together on coming to where they stand on this issue. And they are concerned that if the president is allowed to fire Rebecca Slaughter of the FTC, and if the court overrules that removal protection statute that was been put in by Congress, where is it going to stop? They're worried about what other things, and they're worried about how big of a decision this could end up being. I wanted to listen to one soundbite from Justice Sonia Sotomayor that really kind of exemplifies what I took to be is where all 3 of the liberal justices stand on this issue.
You're asking us to destroy the structure of government and to take away from Congress its ability to protect its idea that the government is better structured with some agencies that are independent.
And that was the heart of what the liberal justices are concerned about. They say that Congress created these agencies, they created them outside of the executive branch, and they want them to be independent. They don't want these agencies to be subject to the whims of a new president every 4 years, potentially. So that is a big concern that we heard come up over and over again in the case. Now, on the opposite side, the conservative justices in court today arguing, well, could Congress take the Department of Education, dismantle it, and create an education commission, going in the opposite direction and therefore taking away the power of what is currently a Department of Education, turning them into independent agencies and trying to take away power from the presidency. So we had, justices on both sides of the aisle really taking it to 2 different extremes, which is a lot of what we often hear in these arguments, Maritza, for people who have never listened into them or never been to them in person. It's a lot of the justices asking sometimes extreme hypothetical questions to try to get at, how far something could go based on, whatever decision it is that they hand down. But of course, it'll be months before we hear how the justices are going to rule on this one.
Yeah, that's the thing to remember here. These are the arguments. We won't know their final decision for months, like you said. The only officials to survive efforts to remove them so far are Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook and Shira Perlmutter, the copyright official with the Library of Congress. So how does this affect those 2?
Well, in the Lisa Cook case specifically, her firing is actually going to be before the court next year. After the turn of the year in January, the court is scheduled to consider the Trump administration's appeal of the lower court orders, specifically for Lisa Cook. That could be a line that the justices draw in these two cases that they'll need to hand down their opinions for, is that there might be a line drawn between the Federal Reserve, saying that kind of they are in a special boat compared to all of the other bipartisan independent agencies that exist across the federal government that might even also be subject to Senate confirmation, but to say that the Federal Reserve might be different in guaranteeing that removal protection, that clause that says the president can't just fire them because he feels like it, or fire someone because he came into office, that they would need to have a reason to fire a governor of the Federal Reserve. We could see the justices draw that line. They might not. Of course, that case hasn't been argued yet. That's due to be argued in January. But there are definitely some parallels, and I would expect when that case gets before the justices in January, we'll probably hear some of the similar questions and arguments spelled out in that case as we did in the arguments today, Maritza.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
You've been critical of President Trump. Were you surprised to hear he was
critical.
going to give you...
Yeah, you're not going to work on the clickbait stuff because I know that's much more enticing. I've had an up and down relationship with God himself or herself.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened, Scripps News end of day snapshot of our biggest story. So let's pick up right where we left off.
Sunday night, the band Kiss, honored for their accomplishments across the music industry at the Kennedy Center Honors. Garth Brooks paid tribute to the band, and Cheap Trick ended the ceremony with a rendition of one of their biggest hits, Rock and Roll All Night. Now, the honors have been awarded since the late 1970s, recognizing those who have influenced American culture. Now, bassist and co-lead singer of Kiss, Gene Simmons, bringing his experience in the music industry to Capitol Hill Tuesday to fight for artists' rights with the Music Fairness Act. The legislation looks to ensure that AM/FM radio broadcasters pay performance royalties to artists and creators when their songs are played. And Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Gene Simmons joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us, Gene. I want you to start by just telling us why the Music Fairness Act is important to artists like yourself.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate you having us on the show. But firstly, let's more clearly identify what this is. It's the American Music Fairness Act. This is an injustice that has existed for many decades. Your favorite artist, perhaps Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra, and this has been ongoing for almost 100 years. So let's say Elvis's career spanned, I don't know, 6, 7 decades. So you turn on your favorite radio station because your radio station plays Elvis or Sinatra or George Strait, fellow Kennedy Center honoree. And everybody gets paid, by the way. The producers, the recording studio, everybody gets paid, except the artist. The artist is not getting anything. And that's an injustice that needs bipartisan support, which is why I'm going to be speaking to both Republicans and Democrats who are duly elected by their constituency to do the people's work. They may not be aware of it, but Elvis and Sinatra are paid zero while everybody else makes money, including our esteemed partners, the radio industry. This is not to demonize them, but it's worth noting this past year, they made almost $14 billion with a B, playing the music that we all love by selling advertising and other ways of making money. So this is not just about the past, Elvis and Sinatra. It's also about the future. And we need to remind ourselves, America created the music of planet Earth, rock and roll, blues, jazz, hip hop, country, and Western. And this is not just about the past, it's about our future stars, who are the stars of planet Earth. It bears noting. I can't name you respectfully a French wonderful artist or an African artist. America's, it's true. America's stars are the stars of the world, and these performing artists need to get paid. How much did Elvis Presley, in his entire career, which spans something like 70 years, get paid every time you heard, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog"? Every time you heard that song on radio, how much did the Presley estate make? Zero, nothing. And this is an injustice that has to be rectified. I believe it's a loophole that needs to get fixed, not just for the past, but for also for our children, the future stars of the world, not just America. And by the way, it bears noting that in Russia and other countries, this is not an issue. Artists get paid.
Well, that's what I actually was just about to ask you about. I mean, this really would bring compensation for artists here in the U.S. basically up to speed with the rest of the world. And this has been debated for a long time. So why has it taken so long?
What is
Why
the
now?
what
Do you
is
think?
the debate? What is more American than working hard and getting paid for your hard work? What's more American than that? Which is why I look forward to speaking to bipartisan senators from both sides of the aisle. This is not politicized. This is about what's fair for America and our stars.
So what are you expecting tomorrow when you're up on the Hill? What do you expect that
I have
testimony to
I
look
have
like?
no concerns whatsoever when I lay it out. I'm convinced that both Republicans and Democrats will pass something that should be a non-politicized issue, which is to pay our stars, the stars of the world, and the future stars of the world get paid for their work. So the radio industry, who are not to be demonized because artists need radio and radio needs artists. That's a fair balance. We're good for each other. Bears noting that radio stations have billboards around the country and other ways they can use our name and our likeness. That means our faces and our images and logos without paying anything. If you did that otherwise, I would take your firstborn. Are you out of your mind? But with they're using our name and likeness so that they can sell advertising and so on. So again, they made $14 billion this last year. Would you mind if artists made some of that?
Okay, so like you mentioned, this bill has bipartisan support. What are you hearing from your fellow musicians and others in the music industry? How are they feeling about this passing?
I spoke with George Strait yesterday, as a matter of fact, at the Kennedy Center Honors, and he was shocked. I said, do you realize that when folks hear your song going back to Amarillo, one of the great songs, that all the times people have heard it, and he's already sold out recently, 100,000 seater when he plays live. But did you know that radio doesn't pay you anything for your vocal performance? And he was shocked. People are not aware of it. We have to cure this injustice. And by the way, the history of this is, I'll be short, I'll be brief. I'm tall, I'm not short. The story goes that once upon a time, radio played live music. So Bing Crosby, who, by the way, every time you hear "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas," written by Irving Berlin and so on, the Bing Crosby estate gets zero for radio performance of White Christmas, perhaps the biggest song of all time. So the estate of radio airplay got nothing. And so once upon a time, musicians and singers would perform live on radio, and Bing Crosby would say, hello to all the listeners and so on. And then the wars came, and the musicians went off to war. So then radio started playing recorded music. There's the loophole. Nobody passed a law that says musicians, artists, performing artists should get paid for the hard work of recording those songs that we love.
I think we could do a whole segment of you covering Bing Crosby and Elvis Presley because I thoroughly enjoy those renditions. But I do
Music
want to
is
ask you.
music, but music is music, and at first glance you may think I like that kind of stuff. I love ABBA and George Strait and all kind of varieties, the spice of life.
I love ABBA, but I want to ask you because you've had an up and down relationship with the president. You've been critical of President Trump. Were you surprised to hear he was going to give you?
Yeah, you're not going to work on the clickbait stuff because I know that's much more enticing. I've had an up and down relationship with God himself or herself. I criticize anybody I damn well please. I may not agree with everything, but so what? Our president is the duly elected president of these United States, overwhelmingly by a vote that's legal, including the Electoral College, and his name is President Trump. Do I agree on all things? No, but I also disagree with my mother and my family on all sorts of things. So what?
That's fair. That's fair. I was just going to ask if you were surprised when you heard that he was going to give you a Kennedy Center honor, because he's not usually favorable toward people who've been critical of him.
No, I'm not surprised at all. And you're leading the witness, Your Honor, says he's usually this and usually that. Who are you? What do you mean by that?
That's fair. Well, I was just, he's been outspoken against people who have been critical of
I
him. and
want
was just
an
wondering if that
outspoken
came-
leader. I don't want a pushover. I don't want somebody who's going to use politically nice language. I'm sick and tired of it. I like a president who talks just the way I do. And sometimes I use potty language. That's also me. I don't think that should be cleaned up. I think politicians, duly elected, doing the business of the people, in fact, are what this is all about. I want them to act the way they normally act. And that includes using potty words and being angry at somebody or not, instead of just, not everybody loves Jesus either. So you're not going to get a rise out of me.
Oh, I'm not trying to get a rise out of you, sir. I really appreciate your
Of
time.
course not. Media would never. Of course not. Media would never try to get that headline. He said this and he said that. It's like, get out. Just have a good time. You're in America. Shut your pie hole and just enjoy the ride. And by the way, for those
All
that
right.
don't agree with anything, there's going to be an election not too far off. You'll be able to vote your conscience. Meantime, respect the presidency. It is the will of the people.
Gene Simmons, congratulations on your honor, sir. We appreciate you being with us, one of the founding members of the
By the
Rock
way-
Band Kiss. Thank you so much. Yes.
By the way, are you still modeling?
What?
Are you still modeling?
Modeling? I don't model, sir.
Oh, I assumed.
Well, I appreciate that. We appreciate your time. Enjoy your time in Washington. We'll be watching you on the Hill tomorrow.
All the best.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
Now we're once again in a position where a president is able to put farmers first, but unfortunately I'm the only president that does that.
Thanks for joining us again on Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer with your daily look at the biggest stories of the day.
What we're doing is we're taking a relatively small portion of that and we're going to be giving and providing it to the farmers in economic assistance. And we love our farmers, and as you know, the farmers like me because based on voting trends, you could call it voting trends or anything else, but they're great people. They're the backbone of our country. So we're going to use that money to provide $12 billion in economic assistance to American farmers. $12 billion is a lot of money, Meryl. What do you think? Peanuts for you, though, right?
Moments ago, President Trump speaking during a roundtable discussion related to agriculture and new moves by the administration with the aim to better support farmers. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull was in the room for this announcement. She joins us now from the North Lawn. Haley, what did we learn from the president's roundtable this afternoon? I know you had a chance to ask specific questions yourself.
Yeah, Maritza, the Trump administration is announcing $12 billion in economic aid to American farmers, aimed to provide a financial bridge, as President Trump is also expected to soon take his economic message on the road. Now, we understand from officials that up to $11 billion will give one-time payments to row crop farmers through a new Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, with $1 billion reserved for crops not in the program. The administration tapping into, the president says, tariff revenue for this program. The president making that announcement just a short time ago during a roundtable that included officials as well as a number of farmers. And it comes as farmers broadly have navigated challenges both in pricing and in trade and have lobbied and pressed the administration for economic relief. The president contrasting his administration with the previous Biden administration, blaming the former president for the suffering of farmers, while we are seeing Democrats criticize the Trump administration over its tariff policy for causing a burden to farmers. Maritza, President Trump telling us when pressed that though he believes farmers want a level playing field and not a handout, he said that he would be open to, he suggested, tapping back into tariff revenue should additional relief be needed. Now, this comes as the administration more broadly has honed in on the issue of affordability. The president pressed on this, saying this.
Well, I think the prices are going to be going down already. I mean, the prices are way down. We brought prices way down from what it was. We inherited high prices. We inherited the biggest inflation in the history of our country. That means prices going up. And we brought it down very substantially. Now inflation is essentially gone. We have it normalized, and it'll go down even a little bit further.
Now, tomorrow, Maritza, President Trump is expected to take his economic message to Pennsylvania. An official says to, quote, put Joe Biden's inflation crisis behind us. Now, this starts more domestic travel for the president focused on his economic agenda, travel including key battleground states as well as cabinet members and other impacted communities, according to a senior administration official. Maritza.
All right, Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull, thank you so much. I do want to mention that if we look at the last 50 years in this country, inflation rates the highest in 1979, 1980.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Where's the Republican plan? Republicans have no plan. They are so divided between themselves they can't even put a plan together. We Democrats do have a plan.
You're watching Today As It Happened, Scripps News recap of the day's biggest events. So let's dive right in.
Alina Habba is out. President Trump's former personal attorney resigns as the top federal prosecutor of New Jersey. Last week, an appeals court ruled her tenure to be unlawful. Habba was tapped for the role in March, and after her 120-day interim role ran out, the District of New Jersey refused to name her for the permanent role. Still, Attorney General Pam Bondi kept her in place, which again was then ruled unlawful. Now, Habba says she will stay with the Justice Department as a special counsel to Bondi. New Orleans Archdiocese will pay at least $230 million to hundreds of victims of clergy sexual abuse. A federal judge approved the settlement today after years of negotiations. It covers more than 500 abuse claims. Earlier this month, some survivors testified in court. They shared painful memories that this continues to affect their lives decades later, and some recalled battling substance abuse and struggling with intimacy. While some survivors said they forgave the church, others said they could not. Poll after poll shows that the majority of Americans want Obamacare subsidies extended, but still, with a December 31st deadline fast approaching, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle continue to really duke it out over what comes next and which version of extension to make into law. Meantime, some families are considering going without insurance next year if those tax credits are not renewed. That's according to KFF, which is a nonpartisan health policy research group. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed joins us now live from Capitol Hill. Nate, we've been talking about this all day, and then the president talked about it in his roundtable this afternoon when he took questions from the press. A big vote is expected this week in the Senate. That is the vote that was promised to reopen the government, but what we heard from the president today is that he doesn't want any money to go to insurance companies. So where are we at?
Well, look, President Trump has gone back and forth on whether he is supportive of these Affordable Care Act subsidies, even as just a bridge to some other form of health care plan. And look, Republicans have struggled for much of the last 10 years to come up with some sort of appropriate plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, yet keep health care affordable. Now, Democrats, we know for a fact this week, are going to have that vote on extending those Affordable Care Act subsidies for the next 3 years. This is a clean extension of those Biden-era subsidies, which were first passed during COVID to make healthcare cheaper for the American people. Republicans largely have been bashing them, making clear that they're not happy about this. They don't think this is the right path forward. And furthermore, they're predicting very few Republicans, if any, will cross party lines to vote with Democrats and support them. Senate Majority Leader John Thune addressing these on the Senate floor just in the last couple of moments.
Democrats' great scheme to fix health care, Obamacare, has failed. They proposed a clean 3-year extension of the enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Clean, Mr. President. No reforms, no revisions. Just billions of additional taxpayer dollars to prop up part of a program that has utterly failed to reduce health care costs.
No secret there about where the Senate Majority Leader stands on these subsidies. And again, Republicans have failed to introduce any sort of competitive rival plan. To be clear, there have been several Republicans, individual senators, small groups of senators, some representatives working across the aisle with Democrats who've introduced possible alternatives, possible ways forward to address health care. At the same time, there has been no consensus on the topic. This is something, again, that Republicans have long struggled with, Maritza, about the best path forward on these Affordable Care Act subsidies. What's worth noting is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer actually took to the Senate floor a few seconds after John Thune to make clear that exact point, that Republicans have not put forward an alternative plan. I want you to listen to what the Senate Minority Leader had to say responding to the Majority Leader.
Where's the Republican plan? Republicans have no plan. They are so divided between themselves, they can't even put a plan together. We Democrats do have a plan, and it's this bill for a clean 3-year extension. This is the only way to solve this problem now, before premiums go way up, and in January, people are faced with such high bills.
Again, that is the Democrat plan. No guarantee that it passes. In fact, it seems quite unlikely. And one thing we do know, while a vote in the Senate guaranteed to happen this Thursday, no similar vote guaranteed in the House of Representatives. That was not part of the deal to reopen the government. There are attempts by some Democrats to force the House of Representatives, to force Speaker Johnson to put those subsidies up for a vote. But look, even if that were to happen, which to be clear is a long shot, no guarantee President Trump would sign it. You just talked about the fact that he was bashing this Democrat-led plan in the White House just a short time ago.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed, thank you so much.
Thanks for spending some of your evening with us here on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a wonderful Monday night.